Tackling the social issue of homelessness and housing insecurity is difficult, due to the complexities surround the current data and definitions of homelessness, as well as deeply ingrained structural problems. Quantitative data of the size, scale and who makes up the homeless population and those living in housing precarity is limited, and definitions stop short of what is required to end rough sleeping itself, because to do so requires us to prevent other forms of homelessness too. Differentiations between the types of homelessness, as well as pathways into and out of homelessness, are lost in many vast definitions. Data collection is often inhibited by single-axis frameworks, as well as issues of the invisibility of certain types of people within the homeless population and the criminalization and prosecution of rough sleepers. Furthermore, past single-axis policies have paid little acknowledgement to those who are, multiply burdened, on the margins of society, rendering them ignored, invisible and discriminated against at political, legal and socio-economic level. Consequently, people facing intersecting inequalities have restricted access to the help they need and are more likely to face housing insecurity and homelessness.
The continuation of damaging austerity measures and intolerant treatment of minorities has created a hostile environment, where upward mobility is inhibited, especially for those experiencing intersecting inequalities and their families. Restricted wealth and asset-building capacity can be traced to intersecting histories of systemic racism, e.g., segregation, redlining, exclusion from public assistance programs, sexism, colonialism, and intergenerational poverty. Given these inadequacies of the reviewed policies in addressing such inequalities, the next chapter will offer recommendations for incorporating an intersectional lens into future policy design and implementation. Recommendations will be made to offer further support to those facing oppression that is not reducible to a single category, in order to provide them with more economic stability and housing security. As demand for food and competition for land rises, it is vital that crop losses are limited. Chemical protection has provided effective control of crop losses in recent years. Alongside chemical fertilizers and improved crop genetics, it has helped to increase crop yields dramatically over the last 6 decades. However, there is now a need to develop complementary alternatives, and researchers from the Rural Economy and Land Use Program have been exploring the potential of, and barriers to, alternative pest management approaches. Alternatives to chemical pesticides are needed because overuse of them leads to pesticide resistance and affects biodiversity and water quality, says Dr. Alistair Bailey. Heightened EU regulations are also leading to the withdrawal of many pesticide products. Hence, complementary approaches are required to reduce use and preserve the efficacy of those valuable pesticides that are still available to sustain food production systems.
People in parts of Western Africa and Southwestern Asia were the first to realize that the dark silvery rocks poking out of the earth could be worked into tools and weapons, sometime around 1500 BC, evidence shows. The metal was probably discovered there by accident when some ore was dropped into a fire and cooled into wrought iron, historians think. The Eureka moment didn't reach Europe for another 500 years, traveling slowly north and west through Greece, Italy, Central Europe and finally to the British Isles with the spread of the famous Celtic tribes. The Celts diffused iron technology over much of the continent through warfare, where their victory was assured due to the circumstances' strength of iron weapons. Perhaps not the most peaceful of cultural exchanges, but where the technology did travel, it caught on fast. Iron made life a lot easier in those days, when just living to the age of 45 was a feat. By that time, much of Europe had settled into small village life, toiling the soil with bronze and stone tools. Notwithstanding the gains made by Finland, it should also be acknowledged that there are important differences between the UK and Finland's housing, population and public services landscape. In relation to the efforts of the Finnish government in increasing the availability, affordability and adequacy of Finland's social housing stock, social housing accounts for a significant proportion of Finland's total housing stock. This differs considerably from the housing landscape of the UK. After the Second World War, large-scale public investment massively increased the social housing sector, but the 1980s saw a large percentage of social housing being sold off, to raise government funds in times of austerity. The right to buy scheme allowed social housing tenants to purchase their home at a heavily discounted price. And the profits raised by this scheme were not used in the replacement of the housing that was sold since then. Levels of the construction of social housing have decreased due to grants from the central government falling from 39% to 14%. Such differences between the UK's and Finland's social housing sector offers a challenge towards the implementation of the FHS into UK housing policy, as a much higher amount of social housing is needed to support people in the UK experiencing homelessness or housing precarity. Self-awareness programs can help enhance students' behavior in class according to several empirical findings. It is also important to consider that those students who are more mindful may be more focused and produce less distractions. Class teachers have noted that there are lesser incidences of student indiscipline and increased compliance in the class. It would be due to the enhanced self-observation and control that mindfulness practices provide. Students will be able to control their impulses as well as the way they relate with people and objects when they become more aware of their thoughts and feelings. This is good since it reduces time taken in disciplining students, hence the teacher is more on teaching and the students more on learning. It should be noted that mindfulness interventions have been useful in academic achievement. Through its practice, mindfulness assists students in attention, memory, and executive functions since the practice is constant. Most of these cognitive enhancements are crucial in academic activities because they influence attention, intake of information, and reasoning of the learner. For instance, the exercises that demand the students focus on a given activity for an extended period help in developing the strength to pay attention to tasks for long. With this improved focus, the students have the ability to excel in class practices and exams. In addition, the improvement of memory and its retrieval through the use of mindfulness practice assists students in retaining information and it improve on their performance.